Hello and welcome to Everyday Data, where we examine currently trending topics in data, analytics, and AI and how they show up in our everyday lives. We're your hosts, Patricia and Zac, MSPAI grads from NYU and data and pop culture enthusiasts. So today on the podcast, we have some great topics, but first we're going to delve into the segment of news of the week. So Patricia, I'm going to share with you what I've been looking at this week in the news, which is, of course, OpenAI. Not that they're not in the news, they're always in the news for something. But what was in the
Yeah,
news this
seriously.
past week was Sora. So I'm sure you saw it. I think we've talked about it. Everyone's talked about it. But the closing of the Sora model, OpenAI, caught my eye because it was tied to also OpenAI also getting more funding. So the latest round of funding was like $122 billion. So some, of course, saying that this closing of Sora was tied, of course, to a pending IPO, which is this continued topic on our podcast about the AI bubble, the AI boom. When's it going to stop? But another fresh round of funding and cutting their losses, I think, is definitely steering the ship of towards what's most profitable for them. So it makes sense. But at the same time, I guess I just ask your commentary on this. If you followed other models, because Sora may be closed, Gemini has released their new image model. So they're still, I feel like, developing these image tools. And we're seeing, as what you're going to talk about, the use of AI video generation tools are increasing from, if you follow politics, there's like a meme war of the regular war that's going on that from both sides. So we've seen these video models, and it's interesting when video models obviously getting more popular, maybe for the wrong reasons, but OpenAI is closing it to cut their losses. So I feel like it's still being developed in an area of interest for AI companies, but maybe not, again, by the closing, a profitable area, even though there is interest in the pop culture for it.
Yeah, like I don't see OpenAI no longer developing that capability. You know what I mean? It's probably just like an integration somewhere else.
Mm.
And I know that they haven't been seeing, like you said, yeah, it's not profitable in that way. Like, and we've talked about this a couple times in that I think the majority way that we see people use AI, like video and images, tends to be for like social media style consumption. And so I just don't see that being very profitable. Um, so yeah, so I'm not super surprised by this, but I don't think that this means that there's going to be a delay in development or that or that there's a scale back from a research and development perspective on
Yeah.
image and video.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it's still, the demand is there, maybe not, again, a paid valuable, but there definitely still is a demand.
Yeah. Okay. I'm excited to talk about my news stories. I have two. One of them is going to be related to NASA. I'm wearing my NASA shirt today. We rock it. The part, I don't know if you can see it, that says every day. I'm excited about NASA, obviously, because right now Artemis 2 is in our space, heading to the moon, or I guess they reached the moon, heading back home. And it's just like I literally all day from the moment I wake up to like the moment I go to sleep, I am watching NASA's YouTube Live and just like watching these astronauts. I'm very fascinated by it. You know this. I love space. I love astronauts. Chris Hadfield, one of my idols. So love space. And so I was interested to see like how NASA is using and testing AI in this specific launch. And there's a lot of different ways, but I think one of the ways that I found really interesting is that they have this machine learning model that they're using to predict solar radiation in space. And that's a big deal because when people leave the Earth's atmosphere, we leave the Earth's protection. And so you are susceptible to the sun in a very dangerous way, as these astronauts currently are. And so this is amazing because what they'll be able to do is predict and sort of be able to warn the astronauts when they need to take cover. And AI is way faster at processing all of this uh, information and data to make predictions quicker than traditional space weather modules. So this is a really big deal. And I think it's really cool to see how they will use AI further, especially as we want to go back to the moon. We're thinking about Mars in the future. So lots of interesting things coming out of NASA. And if you are watching the NASA Lives, like I have learned so much from the scientists that they keep interviewing. And so it's been really cool. So that's one of my stories. Very excited about that. And then the second story, I'm going to get right into it because I want to get into our discussion too, is speaking of videos and AI, on the internet right now is a new series that is taking the world by storm, and that is AI Fruit Love Island, which everyone is obsessed with, including myself. But I've only become obsessed because I was doing research for this podcast. Okay. I would not normally support that, but I've watched so many episodes and I can see where it's very addicting. And I've just been noticing so many more of these like AI short films that are going viral on TikTok. There's another one about this like Greek goddess who has a second chance at life. And I keep getting so many ads for this like short. And so, yes, there's lots of AI, just like films and TV and like these like little short videos going around that are so addicting. And right now, I guess like Zara Larson, who's really just blowing up in the pop space and the music space right now, she posted some video about AI Fruit Love Island and how she's so obsessed with it. And oh my gosh, the comments were just so negative. Like everyone is coming for Zara Larson, trying to cancel her because she's supporting AI. One of the narratives out there right now is that AI is going to kill the world. It's so bad for the environment. And if you support AI, you're basically like ending the earth sooner. And so obviously, Zac, you and I talked about this. We said, we got to talk about this. We got to actually have a conversation about what is the environmental impact of AI? Is it going to use up all the earth's water like we think it is? And let's talk about it. Like I mean, obviously it's no secret that AI technologies use up energy and water. It's not like that doesn't exist. We know that that is important. We have to power hardware. We have to train models. The data centers need energy and water. And so every stage of AI implementation is requiring energy and has some sort of carbon footprint. And so we thought that we would have a conversation about it as well. But instead of just like debating and providing our own perspectives, what Zac and I decided to do is go do some research and let you decide for yourself what you think. So we're each going to share just 3 things we've learned for why AI is not the end of the world and for why AI might be the end of the world, has a bad environmental impact. And so we're each going to take a side. So I'm going to take the side of pros for AI, and Zac's going to take the side of cons for AI. And let's see if we can give you enough facts to make you feel like you have an opinion on whether or not AI is terrible for the environment. So I'll let you go first, Zac. Why don't you share one of your thoughts or one of your facts?
Yeah, I think it's everything you said. It's part of this backlash against AI, and as you mentioned, technology is or not technology. The environment is one of the main concerns by I think all ages because it's such a visible part of our world in climate change, and it's a like kind of a boogeyman almost. So I think it's easy to say against AI, and there's a lot of it. So that climate change impact, as you mentioned, I think the first thing is the environmental natural resources. We all know that the weather's been crazy lately. It's getting worse and worse. The winters are worse. The summers are hotter. Winters are colder. And as you mentioned, I think the first thing is natural resources, power and water. So you kind of already laid out the cons. So that is the negative because as you mentioned, every part of the AI needs to run through these GPUs, which are very energy intensive. It takes a lot of processing power to train models. And then every time we query a model, to jump on your thing, to make a video about AI slop, it takes so much processing power. so much energy and then so much water to cool down these GPUs that are sitting in these data centers. So the massive natural resources are a huge drain on the environment. And one thing that we say that, but if you look at also as doing research on this, where they're putting these, so at least I'm going to frame this from a US perspective. A lot of the data centers are close to Silicon Valley, which is on the western coast of the United States. And for any international listeners, the US is generally dry on the west and verdant forest on the east. So all these data centers are in these states which are already water scarce because it's closer to development. You want faster transmission times for all this data. So they're building these data centers in environments that are already starved for resources. We're already having these water shortages, and now we have all these infrastructure projects drawing on these resources that were just exasperating existing issues of resource allocation and what's fair for the community, and infrastructure for these mega companies to use them. And then at the end of the day, by end users to create Fruit Love Island. Is that a valid use of our scarce natural resources in places like Nevada, Arizona? Yeah, I think it's a horrible use of the environment. So that's definitely a con for me. So with that said, we're already jumping off to negative, but there's got to be some positives, right, Patricia? So what in your research
Yeah.
is like a flip side to counterbalance that? Yes, we're destroying the environment, but with that, what are we getting from that?
It's almost like, okay, yes, we're kind of doing this to the environment, but on the flip side, could AI also have the potential to help fix our carbon footprint overall? Because as much as, yes, AI is using some water, and yes, the placement of the data centers is so strange to me. Don't understand why that is the case. But when you look at the overall consumption of different industries and water, when you think about like the agricultural industry, for example, they're using up 70% of the Earth's fresh water. Whereas in comparison, when you look at data centers, they're actually using up like 1% of the
Yeah.
world's fresh water. So when you're comparing the two, and when you think about the opportunities that AI could have to help fix our carbon footprint, which I'm going to go into right now, you know, it kind of makes me wonder like, first of all, are we holding the other industries to this high standard that we seem to be holding AI to now that it's sort of new in the news and that it seems to be a bit of a change maker in the business world and just like in work in general and changing the way that we do work? Should we not be also holding the other industries to these
Mhm.
high standards is my question. And when we think about other industries and other types of work, I think this is the opportunity that AI has to hold these industries to a higher standard. So one of the ways that I read about that AI can improve our impact on the environment is to actually directly integrate AI into sort of like industrial plants, which are other consumers of energy and water and that are also polluting our earth. And also integrating it into their underlying tech infrastructure. So, for example, we could use AI to analyze real time data that are in sensors to make adjustments to optimize usage and processes. And AI, we know this, it can identify very subtle patterns, right? Like that's why everyone is so gung ho for AI right now, is that a lot of the time our human systems don't really catch subtle inefficiencies. And so AI has been able to do that. And so is there opportunity at like these big plants and in the supply chain to actually improve processes, bring about efficiencies that actually drive a better carbon footprint? So an example of this is like in pharma, for example, there are companies that are using AI to make adjustments to their production process to basically reduce batch failures. So when you think about how much, you know, big pharma is producing, they're producing so many products every single day. And with every batch failure, like you've output so much energy, used up so much electricity, water, you've added pollutants into the air. But if we can drive efficiency to actually reduce the amount of failures, are we actually improving the overall footprint? Same thing with supply chain, right? If we can analyze like demand forecasts, if we can analyze inventory, even the transportation routes, maybe we can actually improve our carbon footprint at that level. So that is one of my points, my pros for AI, right? Maybe it can offset a little bit of its cons. So back to you, Zach, for
Yeah.
another con.
No, yeah, I think that's, I mean, I'm supposed to be the con person, but I think that's a valid point that you bring up that everyone should talk about that. Yes, AI is it's the current boogeyman in the room
Yeah.
and it's easy to point to, but we've become as a society so accepting of certain things. And if you look at it from a historical context, here in New York, there are these sites that are like cleanup sites for chemicals that now we're cleaning up. But of course, at the time, we were accepting that, oh, just pour your waste runoff just down the drain. Who cares? It's chemicals. So, yeah, AI is the current boogeyman. And not that it's wrong to hold them to a standard too, but we also need to, as you said, look at other industries that we're holding these high standards to because they're AI, it's new, it's scary, and like you said, it is positive that there are efficiencies that they could apply. But with that said, another thing to hate on AI, because that's the topic I'm supposed to be arguing, is also not just natural resources and power and water, but you also have to think about the other resources, talking about the larger picture and this current supply chain issue, to put it lightly, that we're experiencing in other parts of the world at the moment, April 2026. But natural resources like minerals and everything that goes into building. So a typical hard drive has a certain shelf life. It's not unlimited. So these data centers, which are just racks and racks of networking equipment and hard drives, because the amount of data that these models generate and use is enormous. So you think your computer uses hard drives? These data centers use a lot of hard drives. And hard drives are composed of natural resources like copper, aluminum, all these metals and these exotic elements, these rare earth metals that you may have heard a certain president talk about the need to secure rare earth minerals that are in all of our electronics. And AI and just tech in general is a churn and burn. And they're doing it at such a high rate that hasn't been seen before because it just needs so much so fast. It's such a boom. Like hard drive supply, memory chip supply for the consumer. If you've seen the news, these tech companies have bought out like all of Western Digital's, which is one of the two big hard drive manufacturers, all their supply and capacity for like the next year. Like consumers can not even get this. So what that means from an environmental standpoint is these companies are going to be scrambling to meet demand. So they're going to be mining more rare earth minerals, mining all these other things. So it's increasing a boom that, yes, it's producing economic gain because people are going to have jobs, but it's stripping the earth of these things. So if you want to be like a not health conscious, environmentally conscious individual, we should be thinking of renewable ways. I'm already thinking the against, but it's renewable ways to manufacture or utilize capacity. And then AI at the moment is just strip mining the planet at such a high rate that it's not allowing things to catch up as far as regulation and just capacity for these rare earth, these minerals, these metals, everything goes into building these data centers. And then the use of the data center, the turnover, when a hard drive burns out after so many cycles, you have to put a new one in. And the scale is just enormous for this, the hard drives and all the other components that are going into the data centers, the GPUs, and the other tech. So it's definitely another notch against AI, in my opinion, on this for how it's destroying the environment. But is there any
Oh,
positive? There's got to be more positives, right, Patricia?
yeah. Oh man, honestly, I really didn't know that or realize that from like a resourcing perspective on the hardware side. So very, very interesting points, Zach. And it's so tough because you and I are like, for AI, but we like recognize so many of the cons behind it. And like, this is a new one. So that's a tough one to argue against. Okay, so I do have a pro. I do have, one more hope for AI where I think that it can support our futures, and that is a different type of resource, and it's supporting human capital. So when we think about efficiency at a human capital perspective and a business perspective, we know that AI drives a lot of efficiency in businesses, which allows individuals to complete tasks faster. And so this is from the perspective of, again, trying to maybe conserve energy and support energy savings. So we currently, I think there's like I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I think it's like 3 billion or something knowledge workers who use skills and information to deliver services to their companies, right? And just if all of those people save like 10 minutes of time a day using AI, they could have, they finish their work. There's no overtime, right? You get back time in your day. You can go and solve other problems like maybe this mineral crisis, and you can turn off your laptop and you can save energy. And so there is a side to AI where we can talk about how just the amount of resources AI saves from like business perspective can maybe offset some of the overall resourcing issue that we have in terms of like energy and just materials, other types of materials that we also consume. When you also think about things like prototyping, for example, we use, other types of materials for building physical models. We could potentially just use these virtual environments to test like many iterations of
Mhm.
tests. And so maybe we can save other types of resources. I do think that we need to think about these resources that are being used to actually build AI infrastructure, though, because maybe we can use AI to help us figure out how to do that, how to optimize our resourcing issue. Really, just I think my whole point here, though, is from an energy perspective. Again, we can save a lot of energy. We can save a lot of resourcing when it comes to things like prototyping, also
Uh-huh.
time. And so that is obviously one of the biggest uses or pros for AI. And I think the one that most companies feel is the reason why they are so gung ho to spend that time and money and invest in utilizing AI.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think that's what you should be thinking as a listener, that out of the box future thinking of don't get boxed into just one story or one narrative. Yeah, think about how it's prototyping these things that use resources, these other technologies or other uses for AI that we may have never even thought yet, and how it's freeing us up as humans to work on other things. Great points, but unfortunately, I have to argue one last environmental point, and I think, unfortunately, just to how I'm connecting what you just said is the environmental impact is the stuff that is currently happening on the ground. So I can't think of a future extrapolated idea of how it's going to hurt the environment in the future other than the impact. So to return to one last point about data centers, and again, listener, as we say data center is just where the physical manifestation or the physical footprint of AI is. So it's the AI model that you're querying, that you're that they're building. So it has to live on a hard drive somewhere, has to be somewhere. So that is of course, the scapegoat for the impact. But you have to also think not just what it's using, but how that location that was built is affecting the local community. So these giant data centers are warehouses. And you mentioned earlier about the human impact. So one way to think about this, and we could get in a whole thing about legislation, because that is a big part of why you asked the question earlier of why are they only in one state but not the other? It's because of, yes, favorable tax codes, land use codes, and all these other legal loopholes that you could mitigate. But the human impact of these data centers is all this work. It takes up the natural resources, and then you have this giant, like, building, this warehouse just sitting there that's only generating a handful of jobs. So once it's actually done and built, you have a lot of construction jobs, but there's no local impact on these data centers. it's only a burden. So it's only using resources. There's a small maintenance team to, yes, swap out the new hard drives, to maintain anything that breaks down just from daily use, but it's not generating hundreds of thousands of jobs that maybe they initially hope for when someone sees, oh, new project from Meta coming in, let's greenlight that. So it's having
Yeah.
very little impact to the local economy. It's taking their resources, but then you also have to think about the pollution that these data centers are using in addition to just the water. So there's going to be like noise pollution is displacing animals in the local environment because you're having to build these giant data centers and it just turned out to be a box. So it's impacting just the local, the wildlife, the flora, the fauna with no net positive for the local economy. And so it's a land use issue. It's the noise and pollution. So you're having fans and cooling equipment and disturbing the local community, the local wildlife. So it's a big burden on the community with very little net positive because no jobs are generated locally. We talk about, okay, yes, they're building a data center in Arizona, but Meta's home office is in California, which is, again, for geography, it's close, but it's a different state. So it's different taxes, different revenue. So the local communities are not benefiting from these data centers at all. So it's hurting the environment and it's hurting local communities.
That makes me think. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Hoppers, but if you
Yes, we watch
haven't,
it.
you need to. Isn't it so good?
Yes.
But it makes me
Talking about
think
the
of this.
environment. Yes.
Yeah, the environment. And if you are an AI positive person, if you're like pro AI, you need to watch this movie because there's a reality here in what you said, right? Like wildlife is impacted by every time that we make advancements as society, we really do impact the wildlife around us, which we need. We need our wildlife. This earth needs its wildlife. And so it's such an important point that you made. So shout out to Hoppers because that's a really, really great movie. And I think kind of at least touches the heart a little bit on what you're speaking to. And actually, my last pro I don't know, might be I don't know if it's a great rebuttal, but I think it might be a little bit of a rebuttal to that. So, my last pro for AI and how it can support our environment and protecting our environment is that it opens up with the data that we're collecting from our climate and from our environment, and in the monitoring of these things, we can model so much more and make better predictions. So obviously we do collect a lot of environmental data, a lot of climate data, and so we can make better predictions about climate change and the impacts of climate change. We can forecast so that we can make or so that we can build solutions earlier to prevent damage to the earth, to the environment, instead of maybe responding like after the fact. So still take some time maybe to get this data, especially with like the new types of impacts that AI is going to have on the environment. We can track wildlife populations, we can track pollution, and hopefully, this type of tracking and modeling will help us to actually enable conservation and will support policymakers and those who are advocating for the environment and for the climate to help develop strategies in order to mitigate some of these fears that we have that AI will bring about. So maybe there might be a short term displacement, like you said, or the issue of jobs, and the fact that maybe the local communities aren't going to be impacted right away. But with the potential of the data collected and the modeling that can happen, can those change makers, can leaders actually drive forth positive change? But that comes down to having strong leaders who
Yeah.
are actually going to advocate for that. And so, I mean, that's something we can hope for, but you know, we hope and we pray that that's where it'll go. But we can, I think that there is opportunity here to take that data and to give back to our environment and to actually support it in its growth. And that is my last point. Do you have any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
Yeah, so on that, I think, yeah, just to shift it to what's next, what the takeaways. I think your last point, just to jump on that, is very salient, is local leaders and getting involved in policy, because we know that there's no avoiding AI, right? It's here, it's already here. And you mentioned that, but I think another point of pushing local, again, through legislation of transition to green energy is the main thing, right? Is already using power, it's already using water. So one of your earlier pros was being more efficient. So if the data centers themselves can become more efficient, or conversely use more efficient resources, renewable resources in their use, I think that'll mitigate what's already in use and what the data centers needs. I think that's the only way forward, that AI is here. We can't avoid it. But since it's here, what's the best way to live with AI? So if we can transition to renewable energy, then that renewable energy can power these. It can become a cycle, as you mentioned, to find more efficiencies, using more green energy to find even better, more efficient resources.
Yeah.
There's the talk of data centers in space, right? That was one of the moonshot ideas. So, does that make it better or worse? I don't know if maybe one of those arguments that it costs more carbon to produce like a solar panel than it returns. So maybe that's a whole nother can of worms. But that's where I see as a kind of a way out or way forward or something to think about. How about you, Patricia, as far as just
I think my last thought is that there's always two sides to everything. And it's so dangerous if you overextend on one side. Like, even between our conversation, I learned so many things from you. Hopefully, you've thought of some new things after hearing from me. And this is coming from two people who are AI analytics data enthusiasts, right? Like, we know that it's here. We want to help people integrate it and to see what the future is going to look like. And even we recognize that there are drawbacks and that there are changes needed and there's opportunity. And so I think at the end of the day, I hope that what people get out of listening to this conversation is that get educated, learn your facts, but be open-minded and try to drive change forward, because it's here. AI is here, and I feel like that's something that we say all the time in our
yes,
podcast is AI is here, but what are we going to do about it? And how are we
yeah.
going to protect humanity and the earth? And I think that hopefully this has been good conversation to spark some ideas and thoughts. And yeah, I would love to hear from listeners, viewers. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on AI in the future, living with AI, living with AI as a planet, not just a person? Yeah, how can we become one with the machine, I guess, right? So, yeah, thanks for watching and thanks for listening to this episode this week of Everyday Data with Patricia and Zac. And we hope to see you back here on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.